Summer light over the bay, a silent envelope of fabric and metal returns to shore with its engines still running. It settles on a hillside and nobody is aboard. 2 trained crew members have vanished without a trace. How does a manned naval airship come back empty? And what happened to the people who were supposed to be at its controls? Case file, verified facts only. The L-8 was a United States Navy non-rigid airship assigned to coastal patrol duty. It took off from a naval air station on a routine anti-submarine patrol with a 2-man crew. At some point, that patrol ended and the airship returned to the San Francisco area. The blimp itself was found largely intact and controllable when it came to rest on land near the city. The gondola showed no obvious signs of violent damage. The 2 crew members who had been aboard were missing. No bodies were recovered in the vicinity of the grounded airship. Local authorities and the Navy investigated. Those are the facts confirmed by official records and contemporary reporting. Timeline. I will walk you through the sequence, and I will clearly mark where stories split. Take this as a map of what we know and where the fog begins. Departure. The airship departed on its assigned mission with a 2-man crew. Verified. Patrol. The blimp conducted a patrol over the bay and the nearby ocean, performing anti-submarine surveillance. Verified. Return. Later that day, the airship returned toward shore. Verified. Recovery. The craft was discovered grounded on land, largely intact and not heavily damaged. Verified. Discovery. When searched, the crew could not be found. Verified. At a clear divergence point, accounts split. This is where speculation begins and where responsible storytelling separates verified fact from rumor. I will mark those splits and keep the difference between what is documented and what is claimed. Controversies and competing explanations have multiplied in the decades since. I'll lay out the main possibilities, the evidence people point to, the counterarguments, and the kind of proof that would settle each question. Explanation 1. Accidental fall. The gondola of a blimp is compact, and crews work in close quarters with hatches and ladders. It is not fanciful to note that in rough handling, in sudden turbulence, or during a routine movement, a person could fall from an open hatch or unsecured area. Supporters of this explanation point to the simple mechanics of working on a small platform high above water. They cite contemporaneous claims, unverified, that items in the gondola were found loose or missing. Skeptics answer that the crew were trained and experienced. They would have known to secure themselves when turbulence was likely. Crucially, no bodies or physical evidence of a fall were recovered at the site or in the immediate search area. To move this hypothesis from plausible to proven would require authenticated physical traces, personal gear found along a route consistent with an accidental exit, a recovered body with injuries matching a high fall, or instrumentation showing an abrupt movement that could explain a loss of balance. Explanation 2. Emergency bailout. If crew believed the airship was in immediate danger, a perceived gas leak, an apparent structural failure, a fire, they could have intentionally left the gondola to deploy a life raft or to attempt a rescue. Some contemporaneous claims suggested life-saving equipment was missing or had been deployed. Supporters of this scenario point out that, in a moment of panic or perceived crisis, trained people can nevertheless make a deliberate choice to abandon ship. Skeptics reply that the blimp was found largely intact and controllable. If the envelope was sound and engines were running, an orderly abandonment seems unlikely. No corroborated distress call or recovered survival equipment has been documented. What would close the case here would be authenticated evidence of life raft deployment, surviving items tied to the crew found in the water with verified provenance, or radio logs showing a deliberate abandonment order. Explanation 3. Hostile action or sabotage. This event occurred during wartime when fear of enemy submarines and sabotage was not abstract. Some contemporaneous speculation tied the disappearance to hostile activity. Proponents of this idea note the context. Vessels were sinking, spies and saboteurs were a real concern, and the idea of an enemy attack fits a wartime narrative. The counter-argument is straightforward. The airship showed no clear battle damage, no definite wounds to the envelope, no shrapnel patterns, no eyewitness testimony of enemy fire that holds up under scrutiny. Accusations of sabotage require hard proof, intercepts, intelligence reports, physical evidence of explosives or weapon strikes. In the absence of any of those, hostile action remains a possibility only because it cannot be conclusively ruled out, not because it is supported by direct evidence. Explanation 4. Folklore, conspiracy, and the paranormal. When a machine returns but the people do not, imagination rushes in. The mystery appealed to magazine writers, to storytellers, and to the public mind. Ghostly narratives, conspiracy theories, and advice column-style speculations began to circle. These are cultural artifacts worth noting. They tell us how people process unexplained loss, but they are not evidence. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. Folklore fills a human need for narrative closure, not for factual resolution. If anyone proposes an extraordinary explanation, paranormal abduction, secret experiments, or government cover-ups, then the burden of evidence is high. Reliable, attributable sources, corroborated physical evidence, or a demonstrable chain of custody for any artifacts. Let's do a reality check. Separate the bedrock from the fog. First, what we can say without dispute, the L-8 was a Navy blimp on patrol. It returned to land with no apparent catastrophic damage to the airship itself. The 2 crew members who had been aboard were missing when the craft was examined. No bodies were recovered at the scene. The incident was investigated by local and naval authorities. Those are the anchor points. Second, what remains unverified and should be treated as claimed rather than confirmed. Stories of bodies later found in the ocean, reports of enemy gunfire, alleged sightings of a life raft trailing the blimp, claims of recorded last frantic radio transmissions, and accounts of phantom apparitions. These circulate in magazines, in oral history, and in some secondary sources. Unless and until they are matched to contemporary, authenticated documentary evidence, official logs, physical artifacts, or reliable witness statements filed at the time, they belong in the category of unverified claims. Third, the most plausible paths forward based on what we do know. Given that the airship was intact and controllable, and that the gondola showed no obvious violent damage, scenarios involving immediate and total mechanical destruction are less likely. That leaves options where the crew left the gondola while the envelope remained buoyant and navigating. Accidental fall or an ill-judged emergency exit fit those basic facts. Sabotage or hostile action is less supported by the condition of the craft, though wartime context makes it hard to close the door entirely. What would resolve the mystery? Conclusive, attributable physical evidence tied directly to the crew, a recovered body with a verifiable chain of custody, reliable contemporaneous communications logs that unambiguously record what happened, corroborated witness testimony from multiple sources that pins down a location or an action, or a forensic analysis showing a path of egress from the gondola that matches traces on the airship. Absent any of those, we are left with a neat, stubborn puzzle. A machine returns and the people do not. There is also a lesson about how stories grow. Official records and contemporary reporting provide the frame. Human memory, secondhand retelling, magazine copy, and later folklore add color but also noise. The more dramatic the gap in facts, the more elaborate the stories. That dynamic is not unique to the L-8. It is how many unresolved events move from archive to legend. So why does this case linger in the public imagination? Partly because of the basic eerie visual, a vehicle returning without its crew. The image violates a simple expectation that people and their tools arrive together. Partly because official records are sparse, and partly because the gap invites projection. The L-8 becomes a mirror into our own discomfort with unresolved endings. If this story sparks a question or a theory in your mind, tell me in the comments. If you have a source, an official log, a contemporary newspaper piece, a Navy report, link it or name it so we can check its provenance. Like the video if you want more cold cases and curious mysteries explored. Subscribe if you want the next deep dive into history's strangest return trips. Share what you think happened to the crew of the L-8 and point to any sources you trust so we can keep separating verified fact from folklore together.